and to welcome especially the President of the Assembly, Rick Dams, who is with us and who will be doing the official welcoming words. But I'm, of course, very happy to have a panel that we have today, which is really exceptional for this particular topic. And I would also like to welcome all those who are watching us live through different means and in different corners of the world. So this event is indeed recorded, and you will have a possibility to follow it later on also online and use the parts of the discussions for the way you would like to do it. So it is now my pleasure to give the floor to the President of the Assembly, Rick Dams. President, please, you have the floor.
Good day to you all from my office in Strasbourg. Webinars are a very good technique that allow us to exchange views, to exchange expertise on certain topics. And they keep on being organized during lockdown. Well, logically, because a webinar allows us to be together in times of confinement. So I really welcome this practice to go on, and that child protection is among the issues on the top of the agenda. Indeed, today we have the opportunity to exchange on this topic concerning all of our member states, and even not only our member states, but more than that, namely the child safeguarding and protection lessons from the COVID-19 crisis learned. Now, problems have been around a long time in this area, but they now surfaced maybe even more during the COVID-19 crisis because they shed some light on blind spots in the protection of children. And this webinar will allow us to exchange views and expertise on these ongoing challenges, and also with, I understand, a specific focus on sports. I am specifically pleased that I see Baroness Massey. Hello, Baroness, amongst the panelists. She is the PACE rapporteur on addressing sexual violence against children, which is one of the reports that the Standing Committee will be debating next week. And it also pays attention to COVID-19, and it also identifies some measures aiming at increasing the protection of children, and which could apply as well to future pandemics and any emergency situation. Let me say that I'm also very pleased to see Aaron Smith, our young friend in your panel. I really strongly believe that it is important to hear your voice, Aaron, and I suppose you speak on behalf of all young people, specifically when we discuss issues that concern children. I think it is very, very important to do so. So as far as I'm concerned, I wish you all a very fruitful webinar. I hope that you will organize more webinars in the future. So Maria, that is a task for you to take on, because it really allows us to exchange views, to exchange expertise, come to conclusions that we can work with, be it within the context of the work of the Council of Europe or outside of that. So to all of you who are in this webinar, within Europe, outside of Europe, on this planet, I wish you a very great welcome, and I also wish you a very fruitful webinar. Thank you very much, and let's go for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for these welcoming words, and also for having underlined how the children's rights and children's protection is one of your priorities as well. And we are, of course, all very happy to have your commitment for the youth and child participation, because this is indeed something that Baroness Massey is very much trying to bring forward in the Assembly. So we are happy that we will be able to count on you, Mr. President. So we now move to the panel, and my intention as a moderator is to invite all the panelists. I put the question, you have about 7 minutes to answer, and I hope that at the end we will have time to have 1 or 2 takeaways each of the panelists. And we will, I'm sure, be able to have some exchange at the end amongst you. So I will now first give the floor to Baroness Doreen Massey. And as the President already explained, she's a rapporteur on addressing sexual violence against children. And this report indeed will be debated next Friday in the afternoon. It's a public meeting, the Standing Committee, so you will be able to follow it. And we will have actually intervention during this debate by the special representative of the UN on violence against children. So it will be interesting debate, I'm sure. And of course, Baroness Massey is a member of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, and she is, I would say, one of the children's rights champions of the Parliamentary Assembly. She has produced quite a lot of reports in the recent years, including on, of course, on violence against children, but in children's rights linked with the UN 2030 agenda, and also on the questions related to health of adolescents. So now, Baroness Massey, your report is very topical because it will, of course, also have an aspect on the situation of violence against children during the COVID-19 crisis. It will make a number of recommendations, I believe. Could you please tell us what are the main ones you will be making, and also what are the lessons learned, both at the level of at the political level, local level, but also at the personal level? Baroness, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be taking part in this splendid event, and thank you for organising it, Maria. It is, as you say, topical and important. Of course, I didn't write the report with COVID-19 in mind. I did it with the intention of highlighting yet again the importance of addressing sexual violence against children. We must be constantly alert, seeking to reform alliances, and insisting that it is a priority issue in shaping the European strategy for the rights of the child. I salute all those who have contributed to fight against this appalling scourge for children, and those who have persisted over the years in naming it and its various contexts and calling for action. Of course, as Rick says, many issues raised in my report, such as inadequate staffing from social services, were a problem long before COVID-19. Violence against children was there, in homes, in schools, in sport, in youth justice systems, and amongst groups such as refugee children. Discrimination was there, whether it be sexual, racial, gender, religion, and so on. And now in lockdown, and I'm speaking mainly about what I know about England now, adults and children have not been able to socialise with resultant stress. Unemployment has risen, the cost of living has risen, increase in food poverty has risen, inability to pay rents has risen. We've seen more domestic violence, violence against children, greater alcoholic consumption, and more viewing of pornography. All of this impacts on children in some way. And there are now serious concerns about the mental health of children, with parents reporting behavioural aspects and problems and depression amongst children. Schools have been closed, except for a small number of children. An estimated that 700,000 children in England, mostly vulnerable children, are doing no work at home, partly due to lack of computers and lack of stimulus. Vulnerable children are already backwards in scholastic achievement. They will fall further behind. Social mobility will be affected, and mental health will be affected. Vulnerability will increase. Also, most importantly, children not in school may have no contact with services which could help. 80% of referrals to social services in England are from schools, and they're not there. I attended a meeting the other day of the Children's Charities Coalition on Internet Safety, and we concluded that responses to the pandemic had failed to address how children would be affected by lockdown. The reports of misuse of the internet with regard to child safety. In lockdown, problems will have been stored up. There will need to be adequate responses from education, social services, the police, mental health services, etc. This will need extra funding and extra staffing. I want to refer, as Maya said, to the recommendations in my report. These recommendations reflect both my professional and my personal and political hopes for children and children's rights and defending children, and also my hopes for local detailed intervention. Firstly, the imperative is for political action for children at global, national and local levels. Different agencies must collaborate at all levels to learn from each other, and this could save money and be more effective. Locally, schools and sports clubs and agencies dealing with children need clear and strict policies on how violence against children can be prevented and dealt with. Thirdly, we need high quality and appropriate education for children. in order to empower them to be assertive in not accepting abuse and knowing how to get help. Relationships and sex education is required, and teachers deserve training to deliver such programs. Children must have a voice. Their stories need to be heard. Children will frequently offer suggestions for improvement to practices. The Children's Rights Division of the Council of Europe has been dynamic in involving children and providing resources. Next, particular regard must be given to vulnerable children. All these are at higher risk of being exposed to sexual violence. I mentioned what's happening to them in education, with mental health and so on. Media and communication technologies must be closely monitored for unfavourable impacts on children. The establishment of a global observatory or think tank as a world resource policy makers and civil society organisations has been suggested by an expert in the field, my British colleague John Carr. Personally, I hope that all the most wonderful people working on the ground to fight violence against children will get the support and funding they need to challenge this terrible, terrible thing that is happening to us. I very much look forward to hearing other panellists and hope we will have time for some discussion. Thank you, Mardia.
Thank you very much, Baroness Massey, for this very interesting teaser to the discussion that we will have next week. Report certainly that will be very useful for our parliamentarians and, of course, other persons as well, to guide them how to go about safeguarding children's rights during the COVID crisis. I will now give the floor to our second panelist, Dorothy Rocha, who is the head of child rights at the Center for Sport and Human Rights. Ms. Rocha, a report on the impacts of coronavirus pandemics on children and sport is just about published or being published today, I understand. And this is, of course, something that has been prepared by the Center with the contribution from over 30 organizations, I understand, around the world. So it's going to be something very remarkable also as a guidance document for us. It usefully spells out the opportunities and challenges. But of course, we would really like to look now towards the future and the opportunities. So could you please spell out what are the main, let's say, the principles that it will give us, and how could we, what are the lessons that we could take from it for the future, please?
Thank you, Marja. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this timely webinar. I begin by congratulating Baroness Massey and the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly for its excellent report on addressing sexual violence against children. The Center for Sport and Human Rights was very pleased with the attention given in the report to children in the context of sport. As was mentioned, the Center recently coordinated the preparation of a report on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children and sport. The report is the outcome of a collective effort of 37 experts and practitioners working in the area of child rights, protection, and safeguarding in sport. And as you mentioned, it will be published in a few days, and we will be pleased to share with all participants of the seminar the report. The report responds to an observation that while much has been reported about the COVID pandemic and sport, and about the pandemic and children, little was available specifically on the impact of the pandemic on children in, through, and around sport. Thus, the report attempts to assess the current and future impact of the pandemic on the hundreds of millions of children who engage in organized sport, from elite athletes to those on school or community teams, and those participating in sport for development programs. The report identifies a range of concerns and opportunities. Among the concerns are those related to the effects of the pandemic on the physical and mental health of child athletes. It also addresses the impact on child athletes in vulnerable and special situations. This includes the girl child, children with disabilities, children in humanitarian situations, children in sports academies, and elite child athletes. Now, time does not permit me to cover all the concerns raised in the report, and so I would like to just focus on three key messages. The first is that sport is a safe haven for children that has been lost to many during the pandemic. The second is eSport needs to have safeguarding policies and procedures. We have learned this very much so during the pandemic. And third, building sport back better after the pandemic should include making child safeguarding the new normal. So first, sport is a safe haven. So while sport has been linked to child sexual abuse and exploitation, it is important to recognize that it is also a safe haven for many children. For some vulnerable children, their participation in sport provides a physical and psychological safe place. Sport structures are amongst the places where physical and sexual violence can be detected and reasonable suspicion of abuse reported. Due to the closure of sport in schools and communities, this safe haven has been taken away from children, and this comes at the same time when there are reports of a significant increase in child abuse, including sexual abuse, occurring in homes coping with lockdown conditions. Preliminary reviews suggest that the removal or restriction of children's access to organized sport has implications for their safety, including a reduction in safeguards against sexual violence. Now, in addition to the closure of organized sport at the school level, Sports for Development programs have been forced to terminate their services that provide safe spaces for children, often living in very vulnerable situations of poverty, migration, and humanitarian crisis. There is a worry that with the economic crisis caused by COVID, there will be a reduced amount of funding available for Sport for Development programs, with development assistance shifting to what is deemed to be more essential. In summary, in a post-COVID world, the role of sport in protecting children needs to be better recognized, appreciated, and resourced. I'll now move on to esports, which have absolutely flourished during the pandemic. And while live sport events have been postponed or canceled, esports have been able to continue to adapt and grow and are increasingly targeting children. Now, esports can be good for children, and indeed studies have found esports to have certain benefits, social, motivational, and emotional. However, concerns have been raised regarding about the security and the welfare of gamers. A 2019 study on female gamers age 16 and above found that 1 in 3 female gamers experienced abuse or discrimination, including sexual harassment, threats of rape, and abuse on social media. Esport organizations should be required to have child safeguarding procedures in place and policies that would respond to online risks, to find measures to prevent online harassment and abuse, and make provision for reporting. Finally, a quick observation related to safeguarding. The mantra in sports is to build back better as the world recovers from the pandemic. We need to use this opportunity for reflection and self-assessment on how to ensure that sport is a safe place for children when children are able to return to participate and compete. Those of us working in the area of child rights and protection need to be united a common safeguarding as a non-negotiable standard in all organized sport that engages children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this information about your forthcoming report. So you say in a couple of days. We are very much looking forward to it. Thank you also for underlining the e-sport, because it's indeed something we haven't really been discussing from the point of view of child protection so far yet in the assembly, and that's something that we maybe also want to focus on in the future. So thank you for that, Ms. Rotska. Now I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Dr. Nikolaidis, who until yesterday actually was the chairperson of the Lanzarote committee. Yesterday the committee elected its new bureau, so you are just very freshly outgoing. Of course, the Lanzarote committee is the committee of the parties on the Council of Europe Convention on the Protection of Children against Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse. You very recently made a statement together with the vice chairpersons on stepping up protection of children against sexual exploitation and abuse in the times of COVID-19 crisis. Could you, Dr. Nikolaidis, explain what are the main recommendations in these statements? And also, as you are very close as a practitioner working with children as a psychiatrician, it would be very interesting also to hear from your point of view as a practitioner, what is the impact that the pandemic has had on children? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind invitation, as well as for this initiative for this webinar. Indeed, there seems to be, I will start in a reverse order to respond to the questions posed, if I may. Indeed, it seems that the current pandemic and responses by societies to address it have a devastating impact on children's mental health. That is now recognized by many international organizations, including the United Nations, which published at mid-April a report on the impact of the pandemic to children, but also UNICEF, WHO, the Global Alliance to End Violence Against Children. There is actually at this very moment a similar webinar going on exactly safeguarding measures to strengthen child protection in the era of the pandemic. The ways in which the current situation can influence children is multi-level. We can identify the impact on the level of mental health, first of all, by fear. Please take into account that, especially in the developed world, this generation is a generation who has been growing up without an immense threat of life present in their daily lives. Probably it's the first time they encounter a social surrounding in which, an environment in which there is a life threat that is active daily. Secondly, because of serious disruption in their own social lives. You know that almost more than 1 billion children globally during the last trimester stayed at home in virtue of the shelter-in-place policies, and therefore all their socialization, their habits, their routines were interrupted, and so everything in their lives just radically shifted. Third, which is very important, is also the socioeconomic impact of the crisis and the measures to as a response to it, which alter the climate in families. Because, as we know, there is a good proportion of families in both the developed and the developing world in which there are immediate economic problems of the household that are affecting the overall climate in the family. All these are reflected in mental health of children in terms of their emotional well-being, their vulnerability to several psychopathological manifestations, and therefore this is to be anticipated by societies, and therefore some response to that should be prepared immediately. The second level, which we have to take into account, and this is where our committee steps in, is their exposure to domestic violence and abuse. As you know, as I already mentioned, billions of children were forced to stay at home. there's probably no worse thing in the world than being locked in with your perpetrator. And please take into account that these children not only were forced to stay in 24/7 surveillance by their own perpetrator, that implies that they had no chance of seeking assistance or help, but also they were deprived from their standard social support like schools, friends, teachers, to which they could apply and turn it into for discussing, for seeking for help. The third level is that because children, especially adolescents, stayed at home and all their leisure, their social contact was done through information and communication technologies, that made all these hundreds of millions of children and adolescents very, very vulnerable to being victimized through the ICTs by various other third parties. I'm talking about sextortion, about the dangers of stealing images or video materials that were circulated among the youth and so forth. All these elements create a necessity, and a necessity for societies to act. And that was the rationale, coming to the second element of your question, of us, me and the vice chair of the Bureau at the time, currently now elected the new chair of the committee, to issue a statement by the end of March, early April, urging parties to strengthen their efforts to enhance child protection, especially in the COVID era. And the rationale was exactly what I already mentioned, but also there were very interesting elements in that statement to which I would like very briefly to make a small reference, that in that effort, special categories of extremely vulnerable children should not be left out. These are children placed in out-of-home placement, in residential and institutional care, children in detention, children with disability, with dependence on others, children on the move, immigrant or refugee children placed in camps and shelters. All these children, we know that especially in this era of the pandemic and the restrictions, are much more exposed than the general children's population. And the second element is that because of that situation, and please bear in mind that at this moment we don't really know how the next fall is going to actually shape up. We might have a second wave, we might have a repetition of measures, so we have to be proactive and try to transform all our SOS helplines, the assistance helplines, in a way that is made available to children through their regular communication with whatever societal service there is, like education. We don't expect that children locked in with their perpetrators will have the time or the liberty to call, to make a phone call to an SOS helpline. We have to make these resources available to them and being incorporated in the regular communication of services that are in contact with those children. Secondly, we should enforce the services that would inquire such an allegation or report. Because, okay, a child omits a signal seeking for help. What happens then? What happens after that? There should be a robust system of services to go in situ, investigate, provide solution for placement to children, and also, this has to be taken seriously into account in the context of the exit from the lockdown measures, because we know that several of these incidents of children's victimizations will be reported to authorities not during the lockdown period, but in the period right after that, in the exit period. Bottom line, our statement, and I hope I didn't consume that much time, ended up in urging parties to think that our societies, while combating the pandemic, should not forget that violence against children is another pandemic that rages for decades, and societies should not decrease their efforts to address this issue, because children are society's most valuable social capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input, Dr. Nikolaidis. Very, very interesting, and also for underlining the need to look forward, be proactive, whether it's a second COVID crisis or another type of crisis. So I think these measures will be equally important. Thank you very much. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Joyce Cook. who is the Chief Social Responsibility and Education from FIFA. Thank you for joining us. It's very, very important for you to have us, have you on board also in this discussion. Ms. Cook, FIFA as an international governing body of football has done tremendous work in the recent years in the area of child protection. About a year ago exactly, you launched this child safeguarding toolkit, and this was accompanied by the creation or setting up of a safeguarding department at FIFA. Last year, basically, we heard from you about this safeguarding toolkit, and it was very, very much appreciated to see how also the Lanzarote Convention could have been maybe inspiration when you developed the toolkit. Could you explain to us or update us what has happened since? What are the further educational steps that you have taken at FIFA to safeguard the children? And also, why do you think it's so important that FIFA is paying so much attention on this topic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marja, and thank you to the Assembly for the opportunity again this year, and to the esteemed fellow panelists. It's a privilege and an honour to join you today. As I said last year when we were together, we have put our hands up. As FIFA, we should have done something on this subject much sooner than we did. Nevertheless, we take our responsibility extremely seriously, and we understand and recognise very well the important role we have to play, and also the voice that we have, being the custodians, the international custodians of football globally. We, since launching the toolkit and appointing our very first safeguarding officer, as you've mentioned, we have more recently established a FIFA safeguarding department, which falls under my mandate. And I'm really pleased to announce, and I've been given permission to do this, that one of last year's panelists, Gloria Viseras, is joining us next month as our senior event safeguarding manager. And we are also imminently, I think today, offering the job for a training and capacity building manager in safeguarding. Why do I mention that? For a number of reasons. What we have done since last year is undertaken, since launching the new FIFA Guardians Toolkit to our 211 member associations, we've also undertaken a benchmarking exercise, an assessment of those associations, where they are in the journey, and what work and support we need to give. And what is clear is we have a lot to do. And I think most people in the game understand the importance of this need that we embed safeguarding measures so that our children are able to enjoy and have fun and find football and sports as a well-being, fun, joyful experience, rather than something that becomes oppressive. And Gloria last year spoke to us very powerfully in that regard. We, of course, have had some very high-profile cases, and not least one that is currently under investigation, and we also take that responsibility very seriously. Returning to the capacity building, we have been very intensely working on building awareness. So we've spent a lot of time in the last year holding regional workshops. We want our leadership, we want the presidents, the secretary generals, the executive committees of each of our member associations to understand why this is important. You will recall the FIFA Guardians catch line is up to all of us, and that's a message that we carry and resonate through. We also are in the final stages of preparing a safeguarding in sports diploma. We are working with a highly experienced academic institute and a leading UN agency to put this together. We understand this will be the first diploma in safeguarding anywhere, not just in sports, and we are making sure that the content is publicly available so anybody can undertake the course. We will, of course, have a FIFA learners ability where they will receive one-to-one assignments, assessments, and we see that as a very critical part to building the capacity. But of course, that on its own is not going to be enough. Hence, my mention of the new training and capacity building manager. We also are learning from the cases that we are investigating that we really need support from institutions such as your good selves to really help us in the local context. You know, as FIFA, we can certainly play our part through our ethics committee to ban perpetrators, but what we can't do is to act as the police or child protection agencies are able to do. And we realize more and more we are very reliant on competent agencies in that respect, the statutory agencies. We also are undertaking monitoring and evaluation and research, and we are looking to appoint an academic institute to assist that with us so that we can learn the lessons. In terms of where we are now and what we've learned during COVID, as much as, you know, the perception of football is that it's an extraordinarily wealthy sport, and of course at the elite end it is, there are vast areas of football and all sports that are not so well resourced as we know very well around the world. And so a big part of FIFA's commitment at the moment is to ensure that we are able to help those member associations and their football infrastructures so that football can continue with a real focus on the grassroots and in particular youth and women's football. It's a very big commitment we have to ensuring that all of those areas of progress are not lost. And then lastly, it has been clear to us, you will have seen, we have worked together with the World Health Organization as well to use our voice to spread the message on COVID-19 and taking health and hygiene measures to protect ourselves. And in addition, we realized the domestic violence situation that had so dramatically increased, and of course, with an impact to children, as you have so eloquently summarized today, and women in particular. So we wanted to do something different than FIFA has done before. And this is the first time in a campaign where we have actually stepped into the arena of talking about violence, domestic violence, and also referencing to eradicating violence in sport. And we wanted to ensure that this campaign was able to actually offer very practical, simple steps that could be taken. So we worked very closely with the experts at the World Health Organization, at the European Commission and others to make sure that we got the messaging right. We worked with footballers, with legends who have spoken out on this subject matter before, so are committed. And we also wanted to focus on help for those that were at risk or were being abused, those that knew of people that were likely to be at risk, how to help in a safe way. And also we wanted to reach out to perpetrators or potential perpetrators to speak directly to them as well on the steps that they can take and the help that they can seek. And lastly, we called on governments to take further measures to strengthen this. And I'd really like to come back, you know, as a closing remark. I have taken note, Dorothy. Thank you very much for an update on the new report. And an area, of course, that FIFA is very connected to is e-sport through our FIFA online game. And I will take that away as something that we need to discuss further in terms of safeguarding policies and procedures. And it's something we will be very happy to look at. So I hope that gives you an overview of what we're doing. We need help. We're not going to be able to do this alone. We are also very happy to work with our confederations and with leagues around the world. And you will have seen maybe most recently that the United Arab Emirates Pro League has just launched a safeguarding program and training, which we were very pleased to help behind the scenes together with the Asian Football Confederation. So those are some of the steps we've taken. We're always welcome to any feedback on what we can do better. And the expert group that we set up in 2018, including the Council of Europe, that group continues to support and guide every step that we take, and we are delighted to be pledged members of the Start to Talk campaign as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm delighted to take any questions, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Aaron as well, because it's something we know we need to do, is to engage directly with the youth, and we need some understanding on how we can do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joyce. That's really impressive and comprehensive what you have been doing in the last months. really taking these principles that we talk so much about to the grassroots level. Really, really impressive. Congratulations. So now, Aaron Smith, we are expecting, all of us have a lot of expectations on you to contribute as a spokesperson of all the young people in the world, as the president mentioned. So, of course, you are attending as a youth ambassador from Northern Ireland Commonwealth Games Council. You have heard now all these recommendations, policy measures that we have been mentioning just a while ago. And you, of course, you have a lot of experience, practical experience into child safeguarding, also in the area of sport. Now, from your point of view as a young person, what do you see as the most urgent measures that should be taken? And how do you see that the COVID crisis has impacted young people? Aaron, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd just like to thank the Assembly for the opportunity to be here and be involved in such an important conversation. I think for me, the issue of most urgency is, as simple as it sounds, just the safety of young people. More specifically, ensuring that young people can exist in a safe space, free from judgment or ridicule. But more in a sporting context, I think that it's paramount for young people to be able to enjoy a sport in a secure environment and atmosphere, which potentially may require a coach or a club to assess the dynamics or attitudes of the players, as well as the venue itself, to help limit physical risks specifically. I do believe that it's of utmost importance as well that children can play their sport with safe people, and policies should be implemented to ensure that. For example, I'm speaking specifically about the UK, that in order to work with young children or vulnerable adults, a criminal records check has to be made to ensure the security, not just of the children, but for the staff member as well. But in my point of view, before they're an athlete, a child should be a child, and they should be seen as such. I think children should be nurtured to grow and succeed, and not push to resentment. In Carl Rogers' person-centered approach of a child is, in my opinion, the best way to act within a sporting context, and this involves providing the child with sympathy, authenticity, and unconditional positive regard, which will help to meet the Article 3 of the UNCRC, where the best interests of the child should be the main priority. I think a fantastic example of this approach being in action was discovered by Loughborough University in 2018 when they studied Glasgow Rangers youth team, where they are, first of all, they're treated as children rather than footballers before they do anything. So another key issue that I feel is a massive priority is providing a youth voice. Just how this Assembly has invited me along, I think the youth voice is incredibly important. Article 12 of the UNCRC states that children do have the right to freely express their views and have those views given due weight based on the age and maturity of the young person. And as a young person, it's incredibly significant when my voice is heard and considered. And I've experienced this personally, this empowerment personally within the NICGC. So during the establishment last year of their Declaration of Sport and Human Rights, they took the unusual approach of involving myself and a small team of other young people in Northern Ireland to co-design this declaration from the ground up. From the beginning, we were encouraged to express our views, and we were consulted on decisions made from its conception right through to its delivery at the Commonwealth Games General Assembly at Kigali in Rwanda. And this boosted my confidence and assured me that I was powerful, that I felt safer, and helped me to realise my potential and feel stronger for it. The impact of young people within this declaration was incredibly well received wherever we went, as we had a rare outlook on life and a unique perspective on how this declaration would be beneficial for young people like us. And when we returned home, we were able to use the messages that we had learned from our delegation to empower our friends and other young people that we knew to be more assertive, and as a result, they felt safer as young people for it because they felt stronger. On the second part of your question regarding COVID-19, however, in my view, fear and uncertainty is the biggest issue for young people at the minute. It wasn't till mid-March that the UK went into lockdown, but when we did, for me, I saw exam pressures rise as subject curriculums in schools hadn't been completed and school was suspended until further notice. So for around 3 weeks into lockdown, about 3 weeks into lockdown in Northern Ireland, exams were completely cancelled and predicted grades were awarded instead, and I felt more uncertain of my future as a result. And it's around this time that Childline in the UK saw a huge spike in calls and counselling sessions that had to be done with young people. And I think it rose to 900 at one point like every week. I'm in my final year at secondary school, so university procedure and my further education at this time felt that it was in major jeopardy. Many of my friends across Europe felt similarly, fearing they would not receive the grades that they deserve. As well as this, lockdown restrictions were different for every member of the UK, and with the devolved governments, there was, and as well as social media, many young people, including myself, became confused as to what procedure actually was in the area. But from a local perspective, in a young person's study that was carried out in April by the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, 73% of the young people asked sought more accessible and factual information in regard to COVID-19, as well as transparency from governments on decisions being made. But as well as this, as Dr. Nicolaides mentioned, another huge issue that is affecting young people is mental health. And since global lockdown, young people have been deprived of human connection, which a standard video call cannot replicate. Body language and eye contact is imperative to building robust, nurturing relationships between human beings. And I know many young people now don't have the access to the help and support that they did prior to COVID-19, leading them to feel isolated and lonely and anxious about the future. An NSPCC study carried out last year demonstrated that young people do not, in fact, turn to their parents or teachers for support if they have an issue, and are much more likely to talk to a friend, youth worker, or sports coach, all of which are the access to them are extremely limited at the minute. I think the decreasing ability for physical activity and the increase in cyberbullying has had a massively detrimental effect to the minds of young people like myself. However, despite the difficulties that young people have had to face in the last few months, they are still striving for change, and we've seen that. In the Northern Ireland Youth Forum study that I had mentioned previously, the main question that young people asked about COVID-19 was, how can I assist and help in my community? Which just goes to show that young people are resilient and we are adaptable and willing to be involved. And historically speaking, young people have always been at the forefront of social change, advocating for what is right despite adversity, as we've seen recently in the Black Lives Matter protests, as well as the Hong Kong protests. And I'm aware that tailoring policy to suit young people isn't always the easiest or the most cost-efficient option, but it is the right and just thing to do. I just think that it needs to be addressed and it needs to be understood that young people are an invaluable vehicle for change, and we want to make the future brighter for everybody. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to speak and give my opinion on that.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I think we all couldn't agree more with what you say. Young people, indeed, they have been and will be on the forefront. And as already was said by our president and also Baroness Massey, at the assembly level, I know also on the other parts of Council of Europe, we are really trying to now make sure that we will make this more institutionalized, that your voices are heard in issues that we are debating. So now we have about 10 minutes left. And as I said at the beginning, I will now give you a floor in the same order to let you say what are maybe one or two of your takeaways from this discussion before. So Baroness Massey, I start with you.
Yes, thank you very much. I really enjoyed all those presentations, and I think that they will add to our knowledge and our understanding of this particular impact of this particular virus. It's good to hear about positive participation from Aaron and how it boosts confidence. And I've always thought that young people not only get a lot from this, building confidence, but they also give a lot. They do help us to formulate policies and practices which we may not have done without their help because they have it from the inside. I was interested that both Aaron and George talked about fear and pressure. And I wonder how we deal with the feelings of children after all this, for all the things that George said, and I mentioned some of them, we've all mentioned some of them, feelings of children after this. Sport's a great outlet for building confidence and social skills. Obviously, of course it is. But what else can be done? And I wonder if there's any thinking about what kind of support they need, including, I have to say, building peer support. How do we train young people to help each other? Just interested to know where we go next with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Baroness. Dorothy, please.
Wow, so many things happening. Joyce, when you talk about the Guardians program, I get shivers. It's so good. I want to take this to a very high level and remind us all that we have SDG 16.2 that says end by 2030 violence against children. And what has not been clear in our messaging is that unless we look at sport, we can't achieve that goal, because we do have situations of violence against children in sport. And I'm wondering if we can't have some kind of a global effort to say that by 2030, we will end violence against children in sport, and we will look at what's coming out of the Kazan Action Plan, which says every sporting body must do what FIFA is doing, must have policies, must have procedures, must have a designated person responsible for child safeguarding, and must have everyone who's associated with sporting children trained in safeguarding. And if that could be our goal to achieve by 2030, and we all come together and work on this, including young people, I think that this would be a good legacy and something that, you know, is possible to achieve. And so how do we pull us together to make this happen?
Thank you very much for this reflection. I just about when you talk about the UN SDGs, I understand that the high-level political forum, which will be meeting mid-July, will be indeed focusing on COVID and how to make progress on the SDGs despite COVID. So I think this aspect you are bringing in, Dorothy, is very, very relevant from that point of view as well. Dr. Nikolaidis, I'm turning to you for your takeaways from these discussions, please.
Thank you very much. I don't think I can condense all this beautiful discussion in just a few sentences, but just to inform that our committee has, apart from the statement, has entered an exercise of collecting good practices, of initiatives, measures that were taken in different countries to strengthen child protection during the pandemic era, during the lockdown era, and to enforce the supportive services for children and families in the exit period. And we are expected, maybe in our forthcoming meeting on September, to be able to consolidate this in the shape of a report that could be informative and flag raise the main problems that have to be addressed, and also indicate and disseminate good practices on that. My last point is not the only conclusion, but having a medical background myself, I cannot but help one thing during all this pandemic era. You know that this COVID-19 virus has unfortunately increased mortality in institutions for the elderly. You know that in developed countries, from 40 to 60% of the fatalities occurred actually in nursing and caring homes. All this time, myself, I cannot help thinking, what if the COVID virus had a behavior just like the previous pandemic of the H1N1 virus, in which we had equal fatalities in all ages? Do you really understand how many victims, children victims, we would count in residential and institutional care settings? That is to say that most of the shortcomings of the system currently is our shortcomings, our society, to fully realize the rights of children globally in advance, beforehand, before the pandemic. So we must act rapidly. We must develop emergency responses in order to make it happen that the Millennium Goals and the goals of the UNCRC and all the good international bodies that work on enhancing child protection be realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much for underlining this. And of course, we are all looking very much forward to seeing the good practices, and something that we will certainly bring on the table of the Assembly committee work as well, because I'm sure there is a lot to be learned from that. So I will now ask the takeaways of Joyce Cook, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back. I think I already alluded to that. A big takeaway today for FIFA, for me and for my team, is the esports policy and procedures on safeguarding that we need to look at more quickly, and it's an important area. And of course, it's been such a popular form of sports during the COVID-19. In particular, I'd also like to take up the challenge. Why don't we create a global coalition of sports bodies to end violence by 2030? Let's make it happen and lay down some markers on how we achieve that together, because I think that would be a good thing to do. And we're already reaching out to other international sporting bodies, and I think we could do that in a more measured, accountable way. So I'd be very keen to speak with Dorothy further about that idea, and I think we should do it. So that's a takeaway. And then reflecting back to Aaron, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we'd be very keen, because we have been discussing how we could set up some sort of a youth forum in the work that we're doing, and we're going to need some guidance and help. And I think it would be, if you have some time and with your team to have a discussion and to think about how we might do that, because I hope we can come back another time and say, well, we have done that, we've set up a youth forum, and it's been, thank you, it's been a real learning experience to hear your voice today, as in particular. So thank you to everybody. It's a joy always, of course, and nice to see Baroness Massey again and the great work that she does, and a thank you again, Marja, to the Assembly for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I have said before, I think the FIFA example, how you are approaching this, could be indeed excellent example for all sport associations and federations. I think they are not just specific to football, but all the others as well. So I think, the idea that you were talking is indeed something very, very valid. So Aaron, also in the Assembly, the Secretariat, we are very keenly listening to you, because as I said, we are working also on the youth and child participation. So I think you will be on high demand in the coming weeks and months. But now, before that, I would like to give you the floor for your takeaways, please.
Thank you very much. I think that it's very reassuring seeing everybody wanting to have a youth voice and wanting to have a representation from young people. Especially from my point of view, many of the sporting organisations that I've come across in the past have maybe placed too much focus on potentially the monetary side of things, and rather than anything else. So I think that it's important that finally now that they're trying to tailor it more specifically towards young people and tailor their policy towards it. I also think that it's important, and it's again reassuring that we are finally seeing that all these organisations are recognising the actual issues that are specific to young people, and recognising how difficult that COVID-19 has been, and trying to come up with solutions for it. And I think that it's an incredible thing. But I look forward to working with Miss Cook in the future, and with this youth forum. I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think that it's definitely worth doing. But I would like to say just one more time, thank you very much for inviting me on and having me be a part of this important conversation.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and thank you all. Excellent discussion indeed, a lot of food for thought, things that we will certainly follow up. So I just remind you that the report of Baroness Massey will be debated next Friday, 22nd of June, in the afternoon. We don't know exact time, but it's a public meeting, so you can, of course, follow it and listen to the discussions. So thank you all very much, and have a nice afternoon and morning for those who are following from the other side of the globe. Thank you very much again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.